Welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It is March 15th, and there are just 5 days until the first day of spring. We are in the home stretch. We will be at spring by this weekend, so that's fantastic. We have a full show today, so let's get started. Today we celebrate a man who introduced Europe to the piggyback plant, and it's now a popular houseplant. And we'll also learn about the man who was an early evangelist for gardening and also for working with Mother Nature. We'll hear an excerpt from a book by a celebrated plantsman as he remembers a beloved snow gum tree. And we'll grow that garden library today with a joyful book about permaculture. And finally, we'll wrap things up with the colorful story about the Indiana state flower and how the zinnia lost to the peony. But before we get to all of that, I just want to take a second to remind you that you can always head on over to the website for the show. It's at thedailygardener.org, and that's where you'll find all of the show notes for every single episode, along with blog posts and information about everything that's shared on the show. It's time for curated news. Today's curated news comes from Story Publishing, and this post was written by the Xerxes Society, and the title is Designing a Pollinator Habitat: 4 Things to Consider. And one of their suggestions caught my attention because last week I had the opportunity to speak to a pollinator expert, and I said to them, hey, I talk to gardeners all the time. If you could only share one thing with them, what would that be? And this expert said, the rule of 3s. And you know what? I found the rule of 3s in this post by the Xerxes Society. So I want to tell you about it in case you haven't heard of it before, and then you can read the rest of this post and find out all the other tips for yourself. But the rule of 3 when it comes to pollinators has to do with bloom time succession. And what this means is that you're trying to provide a continuous food supply in your garden for pollinators. So how this works is that you would choose to grow 3 different pollinator plants within each of the blooming seasons. So spring, summer, and fall. So that's a total of 9 different pollinator plants. And the goal here is to help you increase your biodiversity, your plant diversity for pollinators. Now, of course, if you want to do more than that, go ahead. That's great because pollinators will love that. But at a minimum, if you want to create a sanctuary for pollinators in your garden, this rule of 3 is a very good place to start. And I love what the Xerxes Society included here as they're talking about this rule of 3. They're encouraging us to consider the bloom time. So in each of those seasons, you'll have early bloomers and you'll have late bloomers. And I'm sure you've already guessed that we are acutely aware of our early bloomers in spring, but somehow I think those early summer bloomers can escape us. So make sure as you're thinking about what 3 plants you want to include for each season that you consider bloom time so that you can cover the spectrum, the full spectrum of the season, and make sure that there's always something blooming for pollinators in your garden. Now, if you have a large garden with tons of plant diversity, you probably don't even need to worry about this. I remember when I started gardening and my garden grew to wrap around my house, I had at one point created an Excel spreadsheet so that I could keep track of all the different plant species I had growing in my garden. And I think at one point my list included over 200 different plant varieties. trees. Now, I have definitely scaled that back as my kids have gotten older and as I've started podcasting more because I just don't have as much time to get out in the garden. But I still have quite a nice variety of plants growing in my garden, and I really don't need to work that hard to make sure things are blooming because there's always something going on in the garden. But that said, this article that was featured over at Story, written by the Xerces Society, is the real deal. And if you want to help pollinators, it is worth the read. If you're in the Facebook group for the show, you can check this out very easily. The next time you're in the group, just look for the little search bar. In fact, I'm going to look it up for you really quick right now. Okay, yeah. So if you're in the Facebook group, you'll see the title of the community at the top. It'll say the Daily Gardener Community. And then right under that, there'll be a little magnifying glass. That's the search feature. And that will allow you to search for posts within the group. And if you'd like to read this post for yourself, all you need to do is search for the word pollinator, and this post will pop up, and then you can read all about it. There are 4 great tips for attracting pollinators to your garden. Now, if you're not in the Facebook group, don't sweat it. It is so easy to join this group. It is a private group, though. I will say that. So if you're in the group, your comments there are private. Your neighbors, your friends on Facebook are not going to see what you're writing in this group. That's just the setting that I created for the group. And now that I see some of the changes that Facebook is making to groups, I'm very happy that this group is a private group. So that's fantastic. But if you do want to join, it really is quite simple. All you need to do is go on up to the search bar where you'd search for a friend and type in the words Daily Gardener Community and then request to join. And there'll be 3 little questions that pop up that just help me try to make the show better for you as a listener. And then just request to join. That's it. And then I'll admit you into the group. And I can't wait to meet you there. It's time for today's botanical history. Here's today's botanical history for March 15th. Today is the birthday of the Scottish surgeon, botanist, and naturalist Archibald Menzies, who was born on this day, March 15th, in 1754. Now, there's a famous story about Archibald that goes something like this. One time, Joseph Banks sent Archibald on an expedition, and at some point, he ended up dining with the leadership of the country of Chile. Now, during the meal, Archibald was served nuts from the Chilean pine tree, and these nuts were featured as part of an elaborate dessert for this grand meal that Archibald had enjoyed. Now, Archibald is sitting there, and he begins to eat some of these nuts, but then his inner botanist takes over, and he realizes that these nuts are actually large seeds. And so he does what any good botanist would do. He pocketed 5 of the nuts, and then on his way back to England on the ship, Archibald planted the 5 seeds and started growing the Chilean pine tree right there on the ship. And guess what? He ended up growing them successfully. Now, once these trees started growing in England, they became blessed with a new common name. People started calling them the monkey puzzle tree because someone remarked that even a monkey would not be able to climb the Chilean pine tree. And as a result of this, Archibald became known as the monkey puzzle man. Now, today, sadly, monkey puzzle trees are considered endangered, but like Archibald, gardeners still attempt to grow these curious trees from seed. And you're very lucky if you can find those seeds online. Now, another plant that Archibald discovered that I wanted to share with you today is called the piggyback plant. And this is a popular houseplant And its botanical name is Tolmia Menzies, in honor of Archibald Menzies. Now, you may be wondering, how did it get the common name, the piggyback plant, which I think is an adorable name? Well, it has to do with the way this plant grows. It turns out that piggyback plants develop buds at the base of each leaf where it meets the stalk, and then the new plants basically piggyback off of the parent leaf, and that forces the stem to kind of drop down under the weight of that new plant, and then it will touch the ground, and the new baby piggyback plant can take off from there. Now, because of its growing habit, piggyback plants are perfect for hanging baskets. And they really do make an excellent houseplant because they like indirect light and partial shade. Now, I noticed online that the piggyback plant is often compared to the strawberry begonia because they both have attractive foliage and they are super easy to propagate, which makes them a double win in my book. Anyway, happy heavenly birthday to Archibald Menzies, and thank you for the monkey puzzle tree and the piggyback plant. And today is the birthday of the American horticulturist and botanist who co-founded the American Society for Horticultural Science, Liberty Hyde Bailey, who was born on this day, March 15th, in 1858. Well, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to Liberty Hyde Bailey. He is responsible for starting so many things, including the 4-H movement, the nature study movement, parcel post, and even making sure that electricity got into rural parts of America. He truly was a pioneer. Now, today, when we look back, I think it's actually rather staggering to reflect on everything that Liberty Hyde Bailey was involved in. And luckily for us, we're able to really get a clear picture of his activity because he was such a wonderful writer. Now, before I get into some of his more memorable quotes about gardening, I just wanted to share that Liberty had some tremendous mentors in his life. First, he served as a research assistant to the great Asa Gray at Harvard in his herbarium, and he worked with Asa for over 2 years. And so between being at Harvard and working regularly with Asa, he was really getting the very finest horticultural education that a person could have wished for in the late 1800s in the United States. Now, after Harvard, Liberty went on to work in New York, and specifically, he served as the department chair for horticulture at Cornell University. And if you recall studying genetics, learning about DNA and genes and Mendel, that is definitely due to Liberty Hyde Bailey, because he is the person that actually took a closer look at what Mendel had done, and he realized that it was truly revolutionary work and deserved to be studied in school. So that's a great example of someone who becomes a towering figure in a subject and then looks back over all of the literature that has been written, and he's able to pluck Mendel out of obscurity and put him in a place of honor that he so clearly deserved. Now, if you're having trouble remembering what Mendel accomplished, let me give you a quick little primer. Mendel discovered the basic principles of heredity, and he did that by working with peas in his garden at an Augustinian monastery in Brno in the Czech Republic. And now get this. Over the course of 7 years, Mendel grew nearly 30,000 pea plants. And as he's growing them, he begins to document everything about them. He makes note about their height and their shape and their color. And all of this work resulted in what we now know as the laws of heredity. In fact, it wasn't just that. It was actually Mendel who came up with the genetic terms and the terminology that we still use today. So he came up with terms like dominant and recessive genes. They didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was a direct result of Mendel's experiments with peas. And I always think that Mendel is a fascinating person to talk about with kids who are interested in gardening, because Mendel really was at heart a gardener. And I think today we've kind of lost the fact that he grew so many pea plants and he took such great pains to document everything about them. So that's a great story to share with any young gardeners that you may be working with this year. All right, back to Liberty Hyde Bailey. Now, if you're interested in checking out Liberty Hyde Bailey's writings, there was an excellent book that was written in 2019 that kind of revived his best essays. And it was edited by two men named John Stempian and John Lindstrom. And basically what they did is they pulled together Liberty's essential writings, his journal writings. And when you think about Liberty Hyde Bailey, you should be thinking about someone who was an early evangelist for gardening. He loved gardening, and he wanted everyone else to love gardening too. In fact, one of his famous quotes is that every family can have a garden. And it always reminds me of the little phrase from the movie Ratatouille, everyone can cook. Now, before I share a few more of Liberty's great quotes, I just wanted to read to you what the publisher said about Liberty's work. They wrote this: Liberty Hyde Bailey built a reputation as the father of modern horticulture and an evangelist for what he called the garden sentiment, the desire to raise plants from the good earth for the sheer joy of it and for the love of the plants themselves. So now let me share with you a few of these truly wonderful quotes, these garden gems that Liberty wrote. He said, "If a person cannot love a plant after he has pruned it, then he has either done a poor job or is devoid of emotion." Very true. And here's one of my favorites. He writes, "The man who worries morning and night about the dandelions in the lawn will find great relief in loving dandelions." When I hear that quote, it reminds me of my relationship with Creeping Charlie, because a few summers ago, it was driving me crazy. And then I found a way to change my mindset around it, kind of like the way I ended up making peace with the rabbits in my garden. And I don't know how it happened, but I somehow managed to reframe my thinking around Creeping Charlie. And I really think it all boiled down to learning about its medicinal qualities and also how much it was used and valued in gardens in the 17 and 1800s. Now, I have one more additional quote that I thought would be a great one to wrap up the segment on botanical history today. It's by Liberty Hyde Bailey, and it's a little verse that he wrote about spring. He wrote, "Yesterday, the twig was brown and bare. Today, the glint of green is there. Tomorrow will be leaflets spare. I know no thing so wondrous fair." Very sweet. It's time for Unearthed Words. Today's Unearthed Words come from Roy Lancaster from his wonderful book called My Life with Plants. This is from his chapter called Spreading My Wings. One of my favorite trees in the Hillier Gardens, and also popular with visitors, especially children, was the snow gum from the Australian Alps of New South Wales. Planted small from a pot in 1962, it had achieved a height of around 19 feet with several branches, but had a distinct lean, enabling children to sit astride its lower stem. Its exfoliating bark exhibited several shades of green, creamy white, and silvery gray, which I used to liken to the skin of a python. It was also solid and cool to the cheek, especially so on a hot summer's day. On one occasion, I introduced a group of partially sighted visitors to this tree, encouraging them to stroke or hug the stem and to listen to the sound of the scimitar-shaped, leathery leaves shaking in the breeze. It was a special moment for them and me. Nearby grew a tall-stemmed Apache pine. The pine is today a champion tree, while the snow gum, despite being supported, eventually blew down in a gale. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway. This book came out in 2009. It is a garden classic, and the subtitle is A Guide to Home-Scale Permaculture, and this is the second edition. Now, this book is one of my favorites. It truly is a garden classic. I think it belongs in every gardener's home library. And I know today that most of us have had a decent amount of exposure to permaculture, but back in 2009, it still was a novel topic for many gardeners. Now, the principle that is underlying every page of Gaia's Garden is this: working with nature and not against her results in more beautiful, abundant, and forgiving gardens. Now, one of the things that I appreciate most about Toby's book is I remember thinking the first time I read it that Toby is a joyful gardener, and this comes through on every page. And that's why this book still remains a book that I recommend to beginning gardeners as well as established gardeners looking to refine and hone their gardening skills. What you learn in Gaia's Garden is everything you need to know to create a beautiful backyard ecosystem. And if you started gardening in 2020 during the pandemic and you'd like to know more about permaculture, Toby's book is a must-have. And I just have to share that one of my favorite garden experts, Robert Couric, said this about Toby's book. Permaculture gardens are no longer a thing of the future. They are here to stay and flourish. Gaia's Garden is enlightening and required reading for all people who desire to make their home landscape healthy, sustainable, and healing. And that perfectly encapsulates Toby's book. This book is 313 pages of a garden classic introducing best practices in gardening, working with Mother Nature to strengthen and sustain ecosystems in your own backyard. You can get a copy of Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway and support the show using the link in today's show notes for around $17. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. It was on this day, March 15th, in 1957, that the peony became Indiana's fourth state flower. Now, the story of how the peony became selected as the state flower of Indiana is actually rather quite interesting. Apparently, the fine people of Indiana had initially considered the zinnia, but when that was struck down, they started talking about the bloom of the redbud. But then suddenly that caused a stir because people could not decide whether the redbud was a flower or a tree or a shrub. And that is when a young, distinguished member of the legislature in Indiana named Lawrence Baker, who happened to be a peony grower, suggested the peony. And that is how the peony ended up on the ballot. Now, in 2016, the Daily Journal wrote a wonderful article, and it was called Indiana State Flower Peony Has a Colorful Past. And I thought you would get a kick out of it. Here's what it said. The Indiana legislature has adjourned for another year. It was a turbulent session, but at least the lawmakers did not have to grapple with the thorny issue of the state flower. It was March of 1957 that Governor Handley signed a bill which designated the peony as the official state flower of Indiana. The act surprised a lot of Hoosiers. Suddenly uprooted was the reigning state flower, the zinnia. Now, what followed was quite a tempest in a flower pot. It is a tale that smells of intrigue. And the garden editor of the Indianapolis Star blamed the flower switch on a, quote, small cult of zinnia haters. Well, perhaps a little history is in order. Every state in the Union has an official flower, from the camellia in Alabama to the Indian paintbrush in Wyoming. Back home in the Hoosier state, we can't seem to make up our minds. In 1913, we picked the carnation. 10 years later, we favored the tulip tree blossom. Then in 1931, lawmakers gave the nod to the zinnia. Motives for these changes seemed to be lost in the mist of time, but there appears to have been a trade-off in 1931 when we dropped the tulip tree blossom, because in that same year, the tulip poplar became the official state tree, and that probably salved the hurt feelings of tulip blossom fans. Now, zinnia lovers were caught off guard when the flower switch came in 1957. The director of the Farm Bureau Pet and Hobby Clubs protested, "We have 650 clubs with about 10,000 members, and one of our projects for years has been to provide the children with zinnia seeds to grow. Imagine the children growing peonies." And officials at the Indiana National Bank had already ordered huge amounts of zinnia seeds to be given out at the Indianapolis Home Show that year. They could not cancel the order, so they carried on. Now, if you're a zinnia lover, you'll be happy to know that Indiana's zinnia fans did not go down without a fight, and they began a letter-writing campaign to newspapers all around the state. In fact, a woman named Meredith Haskett felt compelled to wax poetic about the switch. She wrote, "Somehow the men seem quite impelled the zinnia to discard as Indiana's flower, and I think they should be barred from making further boo-boos. I'd fire them all, perhaps. If I could have my say, I'd probably call them saps for spending time and money to make the peony queen. She lasts a day or two in the spring. That's all. No more she's seen." Indiana is a proud state, colorful and strong, and sturdy as a zinnia. Somebody's done her wrong. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. Hey, thanks for spending part of your day with The Daily Gardener. If you want to read even more botanical brevities, just head on over to thedailygardener.org. That's where you can find all the stories, biographies, and books that I share on the show. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. It has lots of goodies in it, and I try to make the newsletter like you're getting a marvelous letter from a garden friend. You can always find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Twitter, and you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. Last but not least, you can easily share your gardener greetings or book submissions by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Maple Grove in Wyoming, Minnesota, with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, and Eric Begay. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.